If you want to pull $10,000 out of your accounts every single month here in Canada, you have probably been told the number to aim for is $3 million. That figure gets repeated so often it starts to feel like fact, but it is broken, and the reason has nothing to do with how much you have saved. It has everything to do with what happens to that money the moment it touches your tax return. Here is the number that actually decides your outcome. Once your net income crosses $95,323 in a year, the government starts clawing back your old age security, 15 cents for every dollar over that line. Stack that on top of a marginal tax rate north of 30%, and you can watch $1,500 a month disappear from an income you already earned and already planned around. I call this the success tax, because it only shows up once you have actually built something worth taxing. I have watched people spend 30 years doing everything right, saving, investing, staying disciplined, only to sit down the year before retirement and discover their real income and their CRA income are two different numbers. That gap is not a rounding error. It is the difference between the retirement you modeled on a spreadsheet and the one that actually shows up in your bank account. So, if you are searching for how to retire on $10,000 a month in Canada, the real question is not whether you have enough saved. It is whether you know how to pull that money out without handing back a fifth of it. Over the next few minutes, I am going to walk you through why the standard 4% rule quietly falls apart at this income level and the exact order to pull money from your accounts so your OAS check stays intact. First, let's look at the gap between what you think you are earning in retirement and what the CRA thinks you are earning. Let's put a real number against this instead of talking in the abstract. Say you are pulling $120,000 a year out of your accounts, which is exactly $10,000 a month. In a province like Ontario, that income lands you close to $28,500 in income tax for the year. That part most people already expect. What catches people off guard is the next line on the page. You are now $24,677 over the $95,323 OAS threshold. At 15 cents on the dollar, that is $3,701.55, the government takes straight back out of your old age security on top of the tax you already paid. So the $120,000 you planned around does not turn into $10,000 a month landing in your account. After tax and the clawback, you are left with about $87,798 for the year, which works out to roughly $7,316 a month. That is a gap of nearly $2,700 a month between the plan on paper and the deposit that actually shows up, and it repeats every single year you stay above that line. For a lot of Gen X Canadians, hitting $10,000 a month in retirement income feels like the finish line, the number that means you made it. That feeling is real and it is earned. But the same number that feels like arrival is also the number where the tax system starts treating you differently, and nobody warns you about that part until the first tax season after you retire. Here's why this catches so many people who did everything right. For most of your working life, this kind of income simply did not run into an OAS clawback because you were not collecting OAS yet. Retirement changes the math because now almost all of your income, CPP, RRIF withdrawals, maybe a small pension, counts as net income in the same year you are also trying to collect OAS. The government is not looking at what you saved. It is looking at what you withdrew, and it is looking at it every single year. I used to tell people to just aim for a total number, get the portfolio big enough, and the rest takes care of itself. I was wrong about that. At $10,000 a month, the account the money comes out of matters more than the size of the number on your statement. Pull it from the wrong bucket, and the CRA, takes a bigger slice than it needs to. Pull it from the right one, and you keep far more of what you built. If you are aiming for a comfortable retirement and want to keep the CRA out of more of it than necessary, stick around, because the next part is the exact order to draw down your accounts so your OAS stays where it belongs, in your pocket. Once you know the threshold, the fix is not complicated, but it does take a different order of operations. Think of your withdrawals in 3 layers. CPP and OAS sit at the base, because that income is fixed no matter what you do. RRSP and RRIF withdrawals sit in the middle, and you want to keep those under the $95,323 line whenever you can. TFSA withdrawals sit on top because the CRA does not count a single dollar of TFSA income against you. Not for tax, not for the OAS clawback. The reason this works comes down to how the CRA actually calculates your income. It does not care which account the money sits in while it is growing. It only looks at what you withdraw and report in a given year. RRSP and RRIF withdrawals get added straight to that number. TFSA withdrawals are not reported as income at all because you already paid tax on that money the year you earned it, before it ever went in. That one distinction is the entire trick behind the stack. Take a couple I will call David and Sarah, both 65, both wanting $10,000 a month in retirement. If they pull all of it from their RRIFs, their combined income pushes well past the threshold, and between them, they lose close to $4,000 a year in OAS payments. Same lifestyle, same $10,000 a month, but a few $1,000s quietly gone before it ever reaches their checking account. Here is the fix. Instead of pulling all $10,000 from the RRIF, they take $8,000 a month from CPP, OAS, and RRIF combined, and the remaining $2,000 comes out of their TFSA. That $2,000 a month is completely invisible to the clawback calculation. It does not touch their net income line at all. The result, they land at the same $10,000 a month, but their combined income now sits under the threshold, and their OAS stays fully intact. This only works if you have built TFSA room ahead of time, which is exactly why the annual limit matters more than people think. The 2026 TFSA limit is $7,000 per person, and unused room carries forward every year you do not use it. If you are still 5 or 10 years from retirement, every dollar you route into your TFSA now becomes a dollar you can pull out later without it ever touching your OAS math. None of this means avoiding your RRIF altogether. RRIF withdrawals are mandatory past a certain age, and the government does eventually force the issue. What it means is sequencing, pulling the taxable dollars first up to the threshold, then reaching for the tax-free bucket to cover the rest, instead of treating your accounts like one big pool of money. But here's the question that trips people up next. What happens if you spent your working years maxing out your RRSP the way every advisor told you to, and your TFSA is still small? That is where the real stress test begins. There is a second gap most $10,000 a month plans never account for, and it shows up later when you least expect it. Private long-term care in a lot of Canadian cities can run as high as $14,000 a month for a single room. That is not a rare worst-case scenario. It is a realistic number for a spouse who needs full-time care in their 80s, and it lands on top of whatever else your household is already spending. The second gap is about timing, not cost. Picture retiring with a $10,000 a month plan built around a 4% withdrawal rate, and the market drops 30% in your first year. That is not hypothetical. It happened in 2008, and anyone who retired that year and kept withdrawing on schedule watched their portfolio shrink twice as fast, once from the market and once from their own withdrawals stacked on top of it. When that happens early, the math behind the 4% rule quietly stops working. People who study this call it sequence of returns risk, and the short version is this. A 30% drop in year 1 of retirement does not behave like a 30% drop in year 15. Your safe withdrawal rate in that scenario is not really 4%. It is closer to 2.5% because you are selling more shares at a lower price just to generate the same income. Here is why this matters for your plan specifically. The $10,000 a month version of retirement looks great in the good years, the go-go years when markets are calm and travel is on the calendar. It is the no-go years, the ones with a market drop or a health scare, where the plan either holds or breaks. And what usually decides which one happens is whether you built a buffer outside the market, something like home equity or a cash reserve, before you needed it. That buffer is not about fear. It is about giving your portfolio room to recover instead of forcing it to sell into a falling market. And it raises a harder question for anyone trying to hit this same $10,000 a month number without a huge portfolio behind it. How much cash is actually enough? And how much is just money sitting there losing ground to inflation? That is exactly where a lot of retirement plans quietly go wrong. This is where a popular piece of advice quietly works against you. A lot of retirement guides tell you to keep 2 years of spending in cash as a safety cushion. For a $10,000 a month lifestyle, that is $240,000 sitting in a savings account, earning maybe 3% while inflation runs around 2.5%. That money is barely holding its value, let alone growing. That advice usually comes from a good place, the fear of having to sell investments in a bad market. But fear is not a strategy on its own, and the size of the cushion matters just as much as having one at all. Here's the cost of that choice, laid out plainly. If that same $240,000 had stayed invested and grown at something closer to 7% a year instead of sitting in cash, the difference over 20 years is roughly $450,000 in growth you never got to keep. That is not a small trade-off. That is close to double the buffer amount itself, given up for the comfort of seeing a big number in a savings account. The alternative most people never consider is a smaller cash buffer, closer to a year of spending, paired with a line of credit you only use if the market drops hard in the same year you need income. That combination protects you the same way the 2-year cushion does, without permanently parking $250,000 somewhere it cannot grow. Follow both paths forward, and the difference shows up exactly where it hurts most. The version with too much cash and not enough growth can run dry by 84, right when long-term care costs are most likely to hit. The version with a smaller buffer and a backup line of credit tends to hold up because the growth kept compounding in the years the cash version sat still. Same starting portfolio, same $10,000 a month target, 2 very different outcomes 20 years in. The point is not to avoid caution altogether. It is to make sure the caution you are paying for is actually protecting you instead of quietly costing you the very growth that was supposed to fund a longer retirement. Here is a scenario most $10,000 a month plans never stress test, and it is one of the most common transitions in retirement. One partner passes away. On paper, the household loses one income source. In practice, it loses far more than that. When one OAS payment stops, the survivor loses up to $742.31 a month, based on the current quarterly rate. That part is straightforward. What catches people off guard is what happens to the income that remains. While both partners were alive, that $120,000 a year could often be split between 2 tax returns, 2 sets of brackets, 2 shots at staying under the clawback threshold. The moment one partner is gone, all of that income lands on a single tax return. That single return now sits in a noticeably higher bracket than either partner faced individually. And depending on how the accounts were structured, the survivor can end up facing the full OAS clawback instead of a partial one, on top of losing that second OAS check outright. the household did not get smaller by half. The tax bill on what is left got bigger. People sometimes call this the widow tax, though it hits widowers just as often. The way to get ahead of it is to plan the income split and the account structure while both partners are still here, not after. That can mean permanent life insurance to replace the lost income tax-free, or a gradual RRSP drawdown while both partners are alive. So there is less sitting in one account for a single survivor to inherit and pay tax on all at once. None of this is something you plan for in the moment you need it. It has to be built into the withdrawal order years ahead of time, the same way the clawback threshold does. It is an uncomfortable conversation to have early, but it is a far easier one than having it for the first time in the middle of a loss. There is a feeling underneath all of this that is worth naming directly. It can feel strange, even a little uncomfortable, to sit here worrying about taxes and clawbacks when you are pulling in $10,000 a month. Somewhere in the back of your mind, there might be a voice saying you should not complain, that this is a good problem to have, that asking for help with this feels almost greedy. That feeling is normal, and it is worth setting aside. This is not about complaining. It is about protecting money you spent 40 years building, money that is meant to support you and the people you care about for the next 20 or 30 years. Paying your fair share of tax is not up for debate here. Losing an extra slice of your OAS to a structure you never had explained to you is a different thing entirely. I do not know your exact family situation, whether you are supporting adult kids, aging parents, or just trying to make sure your spouse is looked after if something happens to you. But I do know that watching close to 45% of a pension you earned disappear to a calculation you did not understand hurts the same, whether your net worth is $500,000 or $5 million. So where do you actually start? Here is the order that actually works. First, work out your own clawback gap. Take your expected retirement income and subtract $95,323. Whatever is left over is the amount exposed to that 15-cent per dollar clawback, and it is the number that should drive how you structure withdrawals, not a guess. Second, treat your TFSA like the overflow valve it is. The 2026 limit is $7,000 a year, and if you have not been maxing it out, that unused room does not disappear, it carries forward. Every dollar you can move into it before retirement is a dollar you can pull out later without it ever touching your OAS math. Third, look hard at when you start CPP. A lot of people take it at 60 because it feels like getting their own money back sooner. At this income level, that instinct works against you. Delaying CPP to 70 gets you 42% more per month for life, and that income is inflation protected in a way market withdrawals are not. Every dollar that comes from a larger CPP check is a dollar you are not pulling from a RRIF or an investment account in a bad market year. Most people treat the CPP decision like a math problem about break-even age. At $10,000 a month, it is really a tax decision because a smaller CPP check means leaning harder on RRIF withdrawals to make up the difference, and that is exactly the income that pushes you over the threshold in the first place. None of these moves work in isolation. They work because they are done together, years before you actually need the income. Start with the clawback gap, because that single number tells you exactly how much of your retirement income needs a tax-free landing spot instead of a taxable one. $10,000 a month in retirement is absolutely possible in Canada. The number was never really the problem. The problem was assuming every dollar of it would arrive intact, without a plan for the 45% combined bite that tax and the OAS clawback can take once you cross that threshold. You have already done the hard part. 30, maybe 40 years of saving, staying disciplined, making the contributions even in years it was not easy. That work is done. What is left is the smarter, quieter work of protecting what you built, sequencing your withdrawals, keeping your TFSA full, timing your CPP with intention, so the number on your statement and the number in your bank account finally match. If you are curious what this same math looks like at $5,000 a month instead of $10,000, that video is right here. And it walks through a version of this plan built for a smaller portfolio. And if today's video helped you see something in your own plan you had not considered, stick around and subscribe, because this is exactly the kind of thing we break down here every week. Either way, the goal is the same. Keep more of what you already earned.